Hello, my friend. How are you?
Good. Did you see I feel like you were playing the music just because did you see my dancing video this morning?
No, but I saw you made a comment on Mel's that you were going to do a dancing video, but I didn't get a chance to see it.
I did. Well, our mutual friend, Melissa Boggs, had done a little dance before her Agile Virtual Summit session. And since I still had a hiccup in mine, I cannot seem to have a clean delivery in that conference. I don't know what it is. But I had a keynote this morning for TechWell, for Agile DevOps and TechWell's conference. And so I did a little dance this morning and just did like dancing in the streets, like music. But and I went ahead and put that on. I will say it made me happy. And I definitely did more than one song. So then I was a little like, oh my gosh, now I'm hot.
Oh well, yeah. You have to remember about the yes, there is a heat component with getting your body moving and all the rest of that kind of stuff. That is definitely true.
Yeah.
So, do you want to do the intro to everybody who's
I will. Welcome. So my name is Trisha Broderick and this is Lizzie Morris, and we have been colleagues and friends in the Agile community, specifically the Scrum community, even more so, for many years now. And I like to say I was very lucky in that we would have all sorts of conversations over the years. Like pretty much anything seemed to be game over the years. And then as things started to escalate even further in the last year, we started having more conversations in different ways. And at one point, Lizzie said, this is what I wish people could hear. Just us having completely open conversations, exploring. And I, in that moment, not drunk, but still in that moment, went, why not? Let's put, and so here we are. We've been doing these bi-weekly, basically almost consistently,
yes.
Where we get on and it's not scripted. Sometimes we have a topic, sometimes we run with it, and we just basically talk through the topic and our differences in opinions, but our difference in perspectives, what we can learn, what we might want to draw an insight out from. We often forget people are listening because we do try to hold back other conversations so that we can be super intense and like very talkative during this. Which actually has been a negative downside for me because I'm like, I'll wait till Thursday.
yes, that has been. We may have to break that up a bit, and maybe just because the world is looking very different now as things are moving forward, and kind of finding this new. I am so glad that I hit on that whole thing about intersectionality. Because I think it moves deeper into so many other areas, right? Even when you're thinking about how you show up at work, and obviously the mindset coaching that I do, right, on the things that go into neurolinguistic programming, I'm starting to see that marrying in. So I'm actually getting excited at looking at this whole topic of intersectionality as to how far this really goes. Right. Because one of the things that I had been looking at lately, somebody told me about it. So I went ahead and I watched a couple of series while I was biking.
Yeah.
And that was High on the Hog. Have you seen it?
No.
Okay. So High on the Hog is looking at how food has been associated to the African-American diet, soul food, what it means, where it came from, and tracing it back to its lineages of the different parts of Africa.
Okay.
So unknowingly, because some things are more kind of, I want to say, almost DNA engrafted, foods that have become part of the soul food diet can be traced back to diets that are happening in Africa. So even the beans, the rices, the spice thing, like the kind of thing that all African Americans always carry, hot pepper sauce. Well, why is the palate even there? It goes back to the heat that was always put in the cooking.
Yeah. Versus me, who has no taste buds and I'm completely happy with no seasoning whatsoever. Yeah. I am that person that's not invited to the cookout, like 100%, like, or at least not invited to bring anything. Like, I won't put raisins in my potato salad, but honestly, I'm never making potato salad either.
So yeah, it's been, so I'd been hearing about this for like weeks. People saying, Lizzie, haven't you seen, because you're such a foodie? I mean,
yeah, I'm in my head thinking, oh, I need to tell Pete about this, because it's totally not like, I'd be like, what is that?
But what was lovely was there was this one particular artist, and now his name is, I can see his face, but his name's gone.
I hate when that happens.
I hate when that happens. But he prepared a meal for this lady who used to be an editor on Essence magazine and travel way back in the day. And she's written all these books about diet and travel and the kind of African, as she put, let me pronounce this word correctly, diaspora. I'm not pronouncing it right. But basically how we have dispersed the dispersion across. So from Caribbean diets to Pan American diets to the African American diet, and all the diets across, right? How they've all differentiated. They've been different, but yet they're the same.
This is the part that, I mean, there's so many things, and I am appreciating, instead of yet another version of the same movie over and over again, I'm appreciating more of these documentaries, these miniseries, these historical series of things that are coming up more and more lately. Because, I mean, that's part of it is just that how much of this is unknown. It's just, you're just completely unaware of it. And so when we talk about intersectionality, we talk about inclusivity in the workplace, it's like, I don't even know what I don't know, which is always going to be the case, but there's just so many.
It just goes so much deeper. It's like, I thought I got to the core. Oh my gosh, there's more.
Yeah.
You know, but that's that whole thing of tapping into, and I'm pulling us into our industry. For those of you who don't understand the industry we come from an industry that's very much about inspecting and adapting and growth, and about people and bringing together the concepts of technology and people to make amazing things happen. Well, when
a nice quick summary. I like that.
You like that? Right? So when you think about how we're always talking about people and the individuals and understanding them and growing yourself with the more experiences that you have, the world is offering each of us as individuals
a ton of opportunities.
For growth. Just a mass. So you're either going to embrace the opportunities for growth, or you're going to be like, I don't want to. But there's just so much out there. So I've been getting into series that I haven't discovered myself. People have introduced me to, and I'm watching them. But obviously, being the big foodie that I am, it's just been so interesting. And there was this whole thing about, which I didn't know. I didn't know that North Carolina was built on rice, the economy, because I just assumed it was built on cotton. Again, having especially with me coming from the UK, not having the best of history around.
Or those of us with educations that are just not very good outside of that.
Yeah, I just didn't tell you that much. But that they manually created a land mass that would work for rice. I didn't know that. So in order to make land mass work for rice, you almost have to create swampland, which means you have to excavate a lot of physical land, which is a lot of labor. Right. So when you're looking at what, and I've been to Charleston, I thought it was just gorgeous and beautiful. But understanding what built the beauty of it is so deeply rooted in this concept of being taken away. But here, what was fabulous with this was it was a chef who had gone back to kind of follow this journey. And he went back to one particular place called Benai. And Benai is on the coastal regions of Africa, West Africa, right? But he went on the road where the people were being taken to the boats on prior to the play that everybody talks about. But he was talking to a historian from there who said, you have to understand that there's two parts to the slavery story, that we were building this part of the continent, which is why we were taking slaves as Africans ourselves. We were taking slaves to help build this city. So we were then trading extra out to the Europeans, etc. So a lot of people don't really understand that part of the history, right? So you're talking about the fact that everybody knew, I mean, there's the knowing, right? That you couldn't just come taking all these people off the land without getting internal help. But to think that there were economies that were being built intentionally from slavery, and then to amass it more, they're not giving out more, right?
At the same time or around while they were tearing down communities that were raising up, right? And it was intentional.
Yeah, it really was.
And it was intentionally like history avoidance. I've gotten, I don't know how much you've researched or read about the critical race theory dynamic. I actually heard about this the very first time from my husband, who has like a French credit shy, 1 or 2 French credit shy of having an African-American history's second degree. He is not African-American, right? But like he did that in college along with his journalism, but he didn't take French. So he didn't get his degree because it was required within part of that program. So, but he learned about CRT back in the 90s in that regard. And so I did, I have a couple of friends that are very big into it or not big into it, but are very educated into it. That's probably a better way of saying it. And so I've started researching it, but the narrative that is even happening like today, this isn't even things like that happened way long time ago, so it couldn't happen again today. Like I'm thinking about what happened then, like even as you're describing this stuff, right? And going, no, that's not just historical, because I'm watching things today where people are like, well, no, if we talk about race, then we're creating differences. And it's like, no, that's it. You're implying that if I, like one of the arguments I kept hearing was, well, I don't want a Black child to hear about critical race theory and think they're less than. I'm like, first of all, that's not what critical race theory says. Mm-hmm. Second, they already feel different. They're already having these discussions. They're actually having discussions on how to process that trauma and how to deal with those things. So if your white child is too young to be talking about that, I get it. So I don't think lots of children should be talking, but we have to. And so it's an interesting thing how that narrative can make us feel really noble. Like I'm just trying to envision what narratives were going along that justified building those swamps out on the backs of other people and not having them own anything, right? Like what was the narrative?
When you think there are so many families that were able to buy land at that time that were Black because whites didn't want them, right? The land. And they cultivated it and made the land beautiful and able to do great things. And now they're being displaced from the land. And
what's the narrative behind that, right? Like what's the narrative that then makes you feel comfortable? Because that's what I've been watching a lot is what's the narrative? Like, oh, he was kneeling during the anthem. Well, I'm for veterans, so that's not acceptable, right? Or this, whatever it is, there's always some narrative that's associated to it that eases the discomfort.
Right. And the fact is, it's uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable. We've got to have the uncomfortable conversations for you to get the whole path. I mean, like, for instance, I've always had, I nickname you, right? The Amazon, because you're so tall, right? Well,
yeah.
Right. Now, understanding there was actually, these really were warriors, but they were Black female warriors. So when you think about Wakanda, the whole thing of Black Panther, and there were these race of female warriors, it was a thing that they had taken from history, that there were these women. And because these women existed, they couldn't take slaves from that tribe, because these women would just slaughter people. They were known to be, they were just like the best warriors, period. And I think, oh my gosh, I have never known that was a real thing. I kind of had this association of Greek
mythology.
Thank you, Greek mythology, right? Associated with all of that. But that was something that was real. I didn't know. You know what I mean? So would it even have been something I would have dug into had I not been watching this? Probably not, because I just assumed I was dealing with something that was mythical, not something that ever had any root in anything that was really real. So how many more people, when you think about it, when you're not embracing who you are and you don't know how to embrace your past or your culture or appreciate it, and then even the inward Black fighting that continues to happen today between people thinking they're a better Black than another Black.
Paper bag Black.
Right. All this stuff, right? Or even just the negatives that a lot of us have had to African Blacks, not understanding the majority of us come from that particular region, because that's where the people that were easier to capture because they were closer to the coast. So we have way more in common than we do uncommon. So our palates, due to DNA, have pretty much stayed the same of the things we like to eat. I had no idea that okra came out of Africa. I hate okra. Hate it. I can cook it in all kinds of amazing ways, but I can't stand it, right? But it's a mainstay that they brought across intentionally to persevere and keep Africans healthy, because it was the diet they were used to. And she broke down what it was they were eating on the ships, right? How they intentionally made the sloth that they made was based out of beans that certain people, the tribes that they would used to that and that could maintain their diet. And what they did in protest was they refused to eat. So they developed things to force open the jaw, so they had to eat to survive. Just all these things that came in, you're like, to understand your present and to understand why people were so frightened of knowledge ever becoming increased. So they intentionally had to create all the laws that they did to keep this nation back, because if they ever understood who they really were, maybe they'd want to rise up and want a sense of true equality and be able to prove all the things we've done. So then maybe there could be a trial where they could win. And when you see all of these things, kind of almost from a legal perspective, right? Of, well, if we want justice, what are the crimes?
Well, I mean, that's the essence of critical race theory, is like to fix the system, not even saying this person or that, right? But to fix the system, you have to see how these laws, it was all legal, like that's where it started, was how the laws were set up to actually keep repression, right? Like to keep people dispersed, to keep people uneducated, to keep people in their place, right? Like that was the whole, or at least from everything I've read and understand so far, that was the essence and the basis for the research for this thing. And they're like, but it's saying one race is more critical. I'm like, that's not what it's saying. It's saying to critically think about how race has been, has had a factor. And then, I mean, even listening to you talk, I'm having these like flashbacks to, if I pull this back to work, it's like how many work events have catered to the white palate, or to the right, to the white experience, to the white norm, to the white celebration, versus any other intersectionality.
Right. And it's all these little, I've come to this, and I know I'm oversimplifying. I know I am. But I've broken it down to these kind of 2 points. Either we really want to solve the problem as a nation, or we don't. And if we really do, we will attack our laws to make it just. And I know that's oversimplification.
Yeah.
I just thoroughly oversimplified, right? But that's what it's going to take. So it's kind of like when we go into organization and people say, oh, we want to be agile, we want to be agile, we want to be agile, right? And then when you sit down with the leadership, you realize like they have no intention of really ever being that way. They are not about to change the processes in the organization. They're staying as they are, and you're just going to have to work within the confines. Well, that's what we're saying about equality.
Yeah, that's what it has been for all the time. That's why like somebody was like, well, why is it continuing to be such a topic now? It's always been a topic. It's just you were never invited to the conversation before.
Right. And so the question comes down to, do we want to solve it or do we not want to solve it? Right. And that, again, that seems like a real oversimplification. But if you really don't want to solve the problem and you want to deny that it exists, worse, you want to deny it exists. You want to deny there's an issue. So if there is
any talking about it, it's just going to add to it.
Right. You have nothing to fix if there's no issue. And it's kind of like, I was doing a show last week where I was talking about, we had a lady came on and was talking about advocating for women's diseases and when you're a woman and how you've got to advocate for yourself. It's like we have got to advocate now. And this is what we're doing. We're advocating for, let's make this something that we're going to solve. Because if we don't advocate for it, it's not going to happen. And it's not that the advocation hasn't been happening. So 50s, 40s, 30s, we know there's all these people who've gone to the system to say, system, recognize us, system, give us justice, system, please make us at least similar to you, system, please, system, please, system, please. But nobody in control of the system really has wanted to, unless... And I've been doing a little bit of research and I'm looking at what triggers when changes are going to be made or when people promise to make changes. Political agendas where you need the blacks for help, or public shame where you don't want the rest of the world to do to you what you do to them. So could you imagine? I probably shouldn't laugh at this, but it's hilarious to me. Could you imagine if the United Nations and the rest of the world decided they wanted to put sanctions on America till America did right?
Well, in some ways.
Right? Because we've done it to other countries, right? You're not doing right by the people who live, right? You're abusing people, you're hurting people. You know, you've got to make it a fair democratic organization, fair democratic nation, right? You can't have dictatorship. But when you look at our system here, it's dictated.
Yeah. It's an interesting dynamic. I'm thinking of two things right now. Like Jane Elliott, a former retired teacher and educator, was doing the speaking thing. And this was a long time ago. I don't know exactly what year, but she asked the audience of adults to stand up if you would be comfortable being treated the way Black Americans are treated. No, and nobody stood up, right? Like nobody, let me rephrase the question, let me say the question again, right? And so basically her point at the end of it was, this is the problem. It's not that you don't know something's off. It's that you're not motivated to fix it. And again, like that essence for me bothers me, but I see it. I see it right now. Like I have somebody in my life that knows straight up, has watched the difference is her kids versus the difference of what her kids who are Black or other races and things that through the justice system, and like what happens to her child versus what happens to them. And she's seen it firsthand. She acknowledges that crap happened. She knows all of those things happen. But what I don't see then is, well, what are you doing to fix that? Instead, what I'm seeing is, well, critical race theory, teaching kids that is going to cause more problems than it is. Like, okay, maybe that's not the one you think is the best. What else then is? Because you do know that something's happening. You do see it. But so much focus then gets put on, well, are you protesting correctly? Are you, asking the system correctly? Are you doing that correctly? Will that impact me? Will this impact me? That there's so much then attention on that you then start to question, did they see it? did they really see it? Like, right? Because the problem is until it's personal to you,
it's not.
It's easy for, again, it goes back to that narrative you tell yourself, right? I'm not being selfish by not doing this. I'm being honorable because I don't want little Black children to think badly of themselves by hearing about critical race theory. So then I'm justified in not wanting any discussions about race because children aren't racist, right? Like, and this narrative that I can keep telling myself, despite fast forwarding and knowing that my kid got treated differently in the court system than his friend did.
Right.
But I don't see any kind of effort to what's happening there. It's just a focus on, well, any of those requests that you're highlighting, any of those things that people are doing, that's not right. That's not right. That's not right. And I'm getting a little pissed. I'm going to own it. Like nothing's going to be perfect. Nothing's going to be, we got a lot of work with it. And so
it's going to be muddy and dirty.
I think
before we ever get this path that we're looking for.
But I think I have a harder time with the people that, like when you said there's two parts, like, do you want to fix it? Mm-hmm. And will you fix it? Right? Like that's for me is like two parts. Like I think I'm more frustrated with the people that do want to fix it, but are actively like protecting their own.
But see that's the reason there's so many things in place why we got the problem.
I know, but for me, I guess in my head, I
think that today people are still thinking the same. See, that's the part that probably people don't want to own.
Well, that's because I disassociated. I was like, no, the people that are going to actively comment about whether you knelt or whether you did X or whether you're teaching this, you're talking about this, are the people who don't want it fixed, right? Like the people who don't see it at all. And there are a group of those, but it is the people that don't deny it, don't discount it, but that are just really hard for me to continue the conversation with, that I struggle with that ability to have the conversation in a way that keeps them proactive and productive with the ultimate goal, not defensive and reactive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have a comment here from Antonio saying, let me pop it up.
Ooh.
There we go.
Hey, Antonio.
No surprise that there's a wage gap for women and men as we discuss being Black in America. Can we also talk about the wage gap between people of color and non-people of color? Absolutely. We are seeing it more and more prevalent, yet a lot of people don't know that when that happens to them, there is a course of action that they can take. But the problem is, a lot of people think the weight of proof of that being the case is sitting on their shoulders, right, Antonia? And it's actually not. So and let me announce this. And the only reason I know this is because of doing the DEI course that I did last year, right? If you have a inkling, even if it's a feeling, and you're like, I think like we might not be getting paid as much as others. If you are thinking that, and you go and you register that complaint with the, why is the department gone out of my head?
HR.
Not even HR, because HR will play that game with you. Mm-hmm. No, there isn't a government agency specifically designed for dealing with this, right? That it won't cost you anything to lodge the complaint. Now, it might take them a while to get to it. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to get to it overnight. It might take a while, but they will investigate it and they can figure out if it really has happened. And if the trend has been there, and we know trend, you only need 7, right, to make a trend. If the trend has been there, that organization will have to pay you the gap for the entire time that you've been employed, along with the other people. And then they have to go on what is called it's a 10 to 15 year watch that they're going to have on the government agency to ensure they don't do that anymore.
Is that federal or by state?
I want to say it's federal. It's federal. I want to say it's federal. And I'm going to go back through and write these
Find it.
agencies out, because after I took that horrid exam, my brain went.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting having been a senior leader, okay, in several organizations, but you know, we were constantly making, you know, doing assessments and looking for ranges and things. And one of the things that we found most, and I can attest that I am guilty of this myself, is that when you're interviewing, okay, you know, you make an offer as the employer with almost this expectation they're going to negotiate back, right? Like there's almost like this expectation. But let's say, and this is an overgeneralization, but generally women and people of color won't negotiate nearly as much as a white man does.
Yes, very true.
And so I'm personally guilty of this. Like, I do not, like, I'm like, they'll pay me what I'm worth. Like, I am that person. I know. Don't even bother writing the comments in. I know. I'm, you know, I've been working on it for a long time. But then I would always have to get equity adjustments. Like, that was how I always adjusted it, because it does build up with promotions and in times. But often women, non-binary, people of color, lots of those intersectionalities, right?
Right.
Will not ask or demand as much, because in some ways it's like, this is the box. This is the box I already get. I need to get the job. Like, I already got a lot of things. I don't want to be considered like I'm going to be difficult. Like, all of those things that we're trying to put on, you know, worried about for ourselves, that a lot of times people with some more privilege don't think about, don't even consider. And they're like, well, why wouldn't I not? I know this happens, and I still don't often ask for that additional rate, right? Like, and yet that was the case. And so, in a lot of times, I'm finding giving people education and tips on how to do that negotiation, how to ask for those, for that, often isn't something that a lot of employers wouldn't do. In fact, they expect you to do it. And so many of us do not.
We don't. But that comes down to a deeper sense of self-worth. So if your whole life you've been told you've got to be better than, you've got to work harder, you've got to get higher grades. There's a great comment Antonio's made about people who are his peers have been able to come in straight out of grad school, but he still needed experience.
Yeah, he had to be bigger, better, faster, stronger, right? Like, yeah.
Right. And you're programmed this. Because it's programmed, because you know, I've heard myself say this to my daughter.
I've heard my friends say it to their kids and to themselves.
Like, no. You can't let that drop, because you're competing not just against people who look like you. And if you want to get a seat on their table, and it's their table. Yeah. Which is telling you that it's not a table you belong at. So we're wanting people to have belonging, but I'm guilty that in my communication, I've told you don't belong. Yeah. So why do you want to be at somebody's table where you don't belong? You wouldn't go to a party where people didn't really want you to be there, right? Yeah. So then why do you want to go work for a company where you think we've already told you they don't want you there, by the language that we have been saying over and over again to you? It's a horrid, vicious circle.
Because then not only that, but then if you get somebody that might be strong enough, like that Antonio sounds like, he's like, I did ask, right? Like, I did try. And then you still get kind of this, but you don't have this degree. And this goes back to the lack of education. I can own it. Like, nobody was really, you know, we always put on the resume stuff or the job posting, this degree or equivalent relevant experience, right? Mm-hmm. Never in the history have I really looked at equivalent relevant history and experience, or like without still having that degree. And maybe it's because it was engineering. Maybe it was because that was just what we expected, right? Mm-hmm. But all of those things were norms that continue as a vicious cycle to get passed down. So then you have this element where you're like, well, but you don't have the master's degree. I don't have a master's degree, and I'm your boss. Like, what is wrong with me, right? Like, I don't have a master's degree, and I still don't go back for it right now, because I'd rather go take a DEI, certification.
We'd rather take the certifications that help versus going back, because we're like, well, why bother go back and do that stuff now? But there are still people who will, especially people of color, non-binary, who will go back to get all the pieces of paper to get themselves to the door.
So there's just less things that they could potentially say they don't have, right?
So you
But
don't
all of that
qualify.
for me, and to as Antonio was pointing out, should equate to more money, should equate to more value, should equate to better recognition with those things. And so many leaders don't see that, right? And that all plays into the bias and the dynamics and that comes into it. I remember somebody would said something once, and it like, and I won't disclose who, because they are working and things like this on their things, but they were like, I went down here and it was to an inner city area, and they're like, and they worked so hard. I'm like, why wouldn't they? Who's they? Right? And you're pulling out these biases that come and going, well, wait, I get paid differently than they do? Yes. And why do you get paid? Well, it's because of the city. And again, we go to these justifications. We go to these like different locations and different experiences. But all of that at the end of the day is really subjective in terms of what that amounts to. I said a long time ago that and I like that there's a program outside of the HR, because if I had my druthers, and maybe one day if I grow this company or what I do, but you know what? You want a title, give yourself a title. You like, salaries are open discussion. Like, the only reason for the confidential salary is to protect the company. It has nothing to do with you. And the amount of time we spend as senior leaders pouring over that stuff to distribute trivial raises and things, and spending the amount of money we spend on performance reviews and things, we could give people more money. like it's just a lot of waste. I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to, would you hire this person? Yes, no, again. Like, after that, the rest of it's just feedback and growth. But all the things we do, I remember a company once told me that they spent almost $3 million to divide $1 million in raises.
And that didn't seem like odd to them.
Nope.
Didn't
think about how many companies do this.
Yeah,
because
probably
it's the norm.
When you start to stack that, when you think about
gotta have that bell curve,
right? Yes,
gotta have that bell curve, and all those things just introduce more bias into the system.
Yeah, they do, because and bullying.
Ooh, say more.
So if you are aware that somebody has the ability to affect what you earn because of their review, you will tolerate from that person behavior you shouldn't be tolerating.
Yeah, it's formal power.
So absolutely, I remember hearing, why am I echoing?
Oh.
I remember hearing a friend use this phrase. I must have something open. Well, you know, when you're on the plantation, you got no choice but to obey the massa. I remember hearing that phrase. I'm being like, what the hell? What are you talking about? It's so stupid. And I thought to myself, an uneducated thing to say, right? In my British snobbery way, right? But then I sat back and I started to watch certain behavior in the organization. And I watched how people were talked to or talked about. And I was like, oh, okay, I got where you're going now. And then I thought to myself, but this isn't fair. They shouldn't be allowed to do this. And they shouldn't be. You see that? You see them, they shouldn't be allowed to do it. So it's something outside of yourself that you don't feel you have the ability to control, because it's they that are doing it.
And I see it all the time. I mean, look at our government, right? There are people like, there's supposed to be these checks and balances. How many people were yes men to, or women, or to people, because their job's counting on it. Their mortgage is counting on it. They're
right.
Like, you know,
everybody is not sitting with 6 months saved up or a whole year saved up like people tell you to do, right? Because economies and things that people are trying to do don't always make those things happen, right? So then you put up with bad treatment
And then the problem is, because people put up with that bad treatment, then that leader justifies, well, I got results and they didn't complain. They didn't.
Well, nobody complained. I haven't seen any complaints.
It's not an issue. They still talk to me. I'm just one of the team. It's like, you are not. If you don't actively understand your formal power as the boss, it's coming out in different ways, and typically not transparently to you, because there's fear associated to that.
There is.
Not only and that's me saying that as a white person with limited intersectionality minorities of dynamics. Now add on each one of those layers that makes you, more and more unique and amazing, but it also makes you more and more isolated.
Yeah.
And
the fear factor, it's, if there was one thing I would want to eliminate in our corporate environment, it would be the fear factor. Because if we could eliminate the fear factor, then things would be transparent, because people would talk, people would confront situations. But the fear factor, and how good the fear factor is, and the bullying around it, right? How good it is. It prevents people from, so there's almost like a culture of see no evil, hear no evil. Right? And I just, oh my God, a meeting just popped into my head some years back. The organization I used to work at. Oh God. And I just thought about it. Right. And that was definitely a classic hear no evil, see no evil.
Yeah. We had 100% turnover when one person took leadership position. We all just left. But I will say I have had, and I want to acknowledge this, because I have had I handed a CEO once the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team book. And I think, I had a great relationship with him. I felt like, that he had respect. It wasn't that I was walking in going, oh, he hates me, right? Like it was a good relationship, but to still hand that book to your CEO was, I was sweating. I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Like, I'm going to get fired. And I left, and he read the book. Didn't even take a long time to do it. Like he did it, and then asked me to come back in, and I was freaking out. Like, oh my gosh, what have I done? This is too far. This is too. Look, Trisha, you may not be afraid of conflict, but you're going too far, right? Like I was trying to check myself, right? Doing all the things that make us, because of that formal power. And even though he didn't ever really assert it on me with that, he still had it, right? And I'll never, I don't even remember all of the conversation, but the conversation was really great. But what I do remember is, as I was walking out the door, and I'm like, that moment when you're about to leave and you're like, I didn't, oh my gosh, I made it through this, right? And I was starting to open the door, and I was you're about to take that deep breath, and I hear Trisha, and I was like, oh shit, here it comes. Immediately I'm right back in fear, right? And I turn, and he's like, you're really quite amazing. You know that, right? And in that moment, any bits of annoyance I had for him, or for his lack of, certain leadership issues or things, but here was somebody that understood his formal power, and understood in that moment really what I needed most, right? Was just that assurance that although this was hard, he was grateful and lifting. And if we can get more leaders doing that, I think about how much more people would be comfortable to speak up, to say those, how much more authentic full selves can be included and inclusive with that. Right. And, I remember him saying it wasn't necessarily the book he wanted to identify in, right? It wasn't necessarily, it wasn't complimenting in that moment to a certain degree. And yet I don't think I could have gained more respect for somebody than I did that day.
Yeah. because somebody was willing to make that shift and take that time to inspect themselves and their leadership and what's going on around them.
Yeah. And even if nothing improved or everything improved, in that moment right there, I felt safe, right? Like I felt comfortable to be myself, all parts of me, and that formal power was limited. And I just don't think we create those spaces enough, especially for the minority dynamics. Because we discount how fearful they may be. Because if it was just him, he'd be like, what's the big deal? She just said this to me. Like if it was him and he had done that, it's different than like me doing it. It'd be different than you doing it, right? Like to take that time to understand that there are those extra weights we've talked about that we carry from those intersectionalities, the extra pressures, the weights, the fears, the dynamics that make being courageous to ask, to negotiate, to highlight, to shine a spotlight on it even harder.
They do. It's easier to have the indigestion, right?
Going home and then eating some,
right? And just going back home and venting to your friends and your family versus the idea of actually going up against it. And this is why it comes back to just my firm belief, right? That where the change will make the biggest impact and start the most momentum, right, is going to be in our corporate environments. Because when corporations start to stand up and say no, then the rest of the world starts to stand up and say no too. Because now they can back that. They can back the lobbyist with it. They start to be the company people want to work for. You know what I mean? That's where they want to go. Everybody's going to tell everybody, no, come here. They treat you well. I was going to Clubhouse. 2 organizations that Blacks were talking about as great places to work were Google and Netflix. They were like, when you come in, there really is this sense of you can be heard, you can be seen, you can be respected. Well, when you look at those 2 organizations, right, there are more people represented in the BIPOC spectrum.
Yeah.
And more and more people are going there because the word gets out on the street, come here, you're welcomed here, you're wanted here, versus the organizations where you're not welcomed and you're not wanted, even if there is a lot of BIPOC people there. Therefore, I think Antonio put it as, I hadn't quite heard that phrase before, you're there basically as, this is what he said, you're there under statistical racism.
Oh,
that's deep. That's something I like want to go do some research on and go, like, oh my gosh, that's a show in itself, right? To be in a place based off that. So we'll bring you in, but we will force you into our lowest tier. So we meet our mark of, yes, we have BIPOC people here, but they're not coming up our ranks. But you won't know that from the outside. You have to get on the inside to understand that's what's going on.
And the interesting thing is, I mean, I can say I have never been part of a leadership team where that kind of discussion was happening, right? Like that's the scary part. It's not like they're behind closed doors. We're like, how do we keep these people down? Or how do we, all of that kind of, like, no part of those are ever happening. And yet it happens because norms, expectation, biases, dynamics that are occurring with those things that I see over and over and over again. And then we tell ourselves back to the narratives. I was with a huge company and they were like, we don't have a problem. And there wasn't a single female senior leader. Yes, you do.
Yeah, where are we?
What?
Where are we? You're like, where are we?
Like this is, and so something's happening that's creating that. And so even if we stop to, instead of saying, are we checking the boxes, but to stop and say, what boxes are we missing? What are we not accounting for? What are we not doing that's creating this situation where somebody thinks they have to do all of that to be included or to be sure. Like, first of all, the odds of any interview being successful and really guaranteeing exactly what you get are so low to begin with. So, I mean, but I could spend days on a soapbox about a lot of HR related processes and approaches to certain things. But that's the problem, is that this is a standard, right? People are so like, we have to do the bell curve. No, you don't.
No, you don't.
No, you don't.
No, you don't. And I think a lot of times when employees don't feel that HR is there for them, HR is seen as being there as the barrier for the organization, to protect the organization.
I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, they want to do a good job for people, right? Like they want to. I don't think people.
Well, I'm going to say that is what I believe their intention is when they get into that career.
Correct.
And then they walk into that organization and they find out what their confines are.
Yes. And what their boundaries are and what they ultimately are responsible for with those things. So I 100% think there's a lot of people in HR that went, wait, is this why I got into this? And then because of laws, so this goes full circle, right? Because of different laws, they're protecting different dynamics and things that technically mark off all the boxes for protection, but actually are creating other problems. And this is why I think you're right in that it's the laws have to evolve to a certain degree.
Yeah, they do. But and that's it's like that's just one area, right? So we've got laws that need to evolve in real estate, laws that have to evolve
banking,
in banking,
financial, health, like all of it.
That's why when I think about intersectionality, I see it bigger, because it's almost, you've got to take intersectionality to the dimensions that exist around your life. Health.
Every part of your life.
Yeah, because when you're talking about your health, you've got to think about when you go into a hospital or you get sick, how are you treated based on the packaging that you've arrived in and what you identify as. That's an intersection.
Yep.
Right there. Then you go into finance, the intersectionality of finance. It's just, there's just like.
So somebody said, why isn't these other areas talked about as much? Why is it the justice and police in particular? I'm like, because how do you address the other areas without justice, right? So justice has to be first. Otherwise, how do you address banking? What do you call it? What are you doing? How do you address any of the other industries if you don't adjust not just police, but the entire justice system across the board with things of that? And so like, yeah, but that's always a big comment there. I'm like, well, if it was everywhere, we're only talking about that. I'm like, because that's
where the biggest change has to be made to be able to trickle down and affect.
Well, how do you make the changes to the other areas without the justice?
You can't, because they'll use the justice to keep things exactly the way they are.
Hence why Jim Crow was super effective.
You know, I sat back last week. I was in the living room sitting down, and I thought to myself, the only way I could really, really, really help this, and it was one of these personal conversations that you have with yourself, I was like, maybe I need to go back into a law degree.
Back into logic. My best friend is doing that. She's taking the LSAT.
I'm like, maybe that's what I really need to do.
And then I popped open the book and felt very stupid. So I'll let her do that. And then I'll just, bring her people, I guess. I don't know. Like I
just thought about it, because I'm like, it's so drenchdly deep and hidden and loopholed and processed and pretty worded and zipped up neatly. It's just like, oh my God, where do you start? And I think it can become so overwhelming that you don't start. You freeze.
Or you find a narrative, which is what many people are doing, that makes the current discomfort a little less discomfortable. So let's take the voting laws that are changing, that people are making change, right? There's like, if you really unpack a lot of the laws that are getting changed, it's like, well, we don't want people not like faking votes. Well, so far, the people that faked votes have gotten caught and facing jail time. Well, but there's bad people on registries. Yeah, we don't clean up data. I'm willing to bet if I go on your computer, your data is not cleaned up either. It's like, so what's the narrative that you tell yourself that's like mail-in voting is all fraudulent? Well, I've been doing mail-in voting since Colorado, since I lived here. It's amazing, like versus what we used to do in Michigan. I vote way more here than I ever voted in Michigan. So once you start to really understand that people were accounting for the fraud, like they are getting prosecuted and stuff, why are you really stopping mail-in voting? Because more people are voting? Because I vote more with mail-in voting than I ever did before. But what's the narrative you have to tell yourself that justifies that one drop box in this entire area was appropriate? Well, I didn't know that that's true. Right? Or, well, we only have one drop box because you're in this little area and you have mail-in voting, right? Like, and all these things that I don't think, to your point of the complexities, people understand how difficult these boundaries are, to the point that it almost makes me feel like, why do we even vote anyways? Because so much of this is already rigged by how they've drawn the lines anyway.
And that is where I think a lot of people fall into.
But then it falls into that, and then you don't vote, and so that's why Stacey Abrams, and I'm blanking on there was another woman that was instrumental in Georgia, and I'm blanking on her name, and I
can see her face, but I can't.
I can't. Dang it. They were so instrumental because they were proactively like, how do we support these voters? It is not just. I guess I'm asking if we do have listeners that are like, no, I'm okay with these voting law changes and things because it's going to stop the fraud. If it stops to fraud, but stops also how many BIPOC votes.
Are you still happy then?
Are you still happy then?
Mm-hmm.
And if you are, you need to ask yourself why.
Yeah.
Because I will take to fraud, but gain this many additional voters because this is their country too.
And that's the key, is giving everybody who is here
a voice,
understanding that it is your country. You have a right to speak. We want to hear your opinion. And we want to build a country that's good for you too.
And the only way we're doing that, and it's already an hour, is through continuing the conversation. It's not always easy. We don't always have answers, but part of it is just taking the sting out of, we can't have those conversations. Yes, we can. Even if we don't have the answers, we can have the conversation, because the more that we talk about the stuff, the more that we learn, the more that we grow, the more that people feel seen and heard. And maybe, just maybe, we can take some steps, please.
I mean, we have taken steps.
I know. I'm being very...
There aren't steps, but we're so behind.
I know.
That the 10 steps you've made forward, you're like, this should have been 100. But we just got to keep doing it. And we are committed to keep having the conversation, that even if it's one person or two people who hear the conversation, come back and have the conversation, think about it, talk about it. And it raises what I call that, I thought about that. If we can keep raising hmms in our corporate spaces, I believe it will change our community spaces. So that's, if you're ever wondering, why does she keep doing this stupid show? Why do they keep going on? It's not like they got all these great people coming, and it's not like 100,000 people watching them at one time. Why the hell do they do it? Because if it's one leader goes, and asks a question, maybe of their HR VP, and then maybe goes asks another question of some other hiring managers, and maybe goes and takes as we would say, a Gemba walk through the organization. Just have a walk.
See what happens.
Look, see what happens. What have people been saying? What have you been putting out there? How many people who are BIPOC are applying for jobs? And how many of them are getting through? And when they're not, why are they not? Is it because they're unqualified? Or is it something else? So the minute you get the I believe another can come that would eventually evolve into an action.
And if nothing else, we get a lot of hmms. So some cases, this is just for us too.
Hey, yeah, we can definitely be taking things all day. So now we have got to do a show on statistical racism.
Okay. I'm game. Let's. I
need to learn. And Antonio said, please invite me on because I'd love to chat stuff. So I've written down Antonio's name because we're
nice. Welcome.
Right. So we will bring you on. So we're going to set the date for that particular, it may not be next week, but we'll set the date for that because we got to do some research.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to be like, just totally like, what the heck is that? So I got to do some research. So I can understand what this is. Right. And we can nerd out just a little bit because the two of us here are both nerds. So we got to do a little bit of research so we could nerd out just a wee bit. So Antonio, we have heard and seen you, and you brought something up where I made me go, what? Yeah. So
thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you for everybody who has watched. We appreciate you. And please look out for the podcast because we do have some podcasts that are out there of the show. So you can listen to the show even if you haven't been able to see the show. So please check out all links on that. So again, Trisha, my wonderful friend, thank you so much for being here with me.
Always. Likewise.
Appreciate you. And everybody take care and keep continuing the conversation because it makes a difference. And even if you don't see the difference right away, at least allow that seed to get sown. Somewhere along the line, it's going to shoot up somewhere and make something grow. So take care and have a wonderful rest of the week.